Week 13 of the NFL season will officially bring Bye-Mageddon with 6 teams on a bye. Now, the good news is a lot of our top fantasy producers won't be missing this week, but that doesn't mean that depth is going to be hurting on our roster. So we need to get set to make it through the week, even if it's just picking up a couple of guys that we can toss in as a flex to help us win and get to the fantasy playoffs. Yo, what is going on, Headliner Nation? Welcome into week 13. 6 teams missing this week. And if you're going to be missing a little bit of depth and you've got to try and make up for that, the waiver wire is going to be the perfect place to find that. Will those guys be available to you though this week? That is going to be the biggest question. This episode is going to cover running backs, wide receivers, and tight ends that we could potentially be adding to help our team right away, or someone we should have for the stretch run, and then some quarterbacks and defensive special teams that we might need to stream this week to get by. And then at the end of the video, we'll talk about some players that you could potentially just drop all together. Hit the like button for me, subscribe if you're new here, turn on the bell notifications, and let's hop right into it, starting off with the top running backs you should be looking at. I've been mentioning it for a couple of weeks now with running backs. You should be holding on to your handcuffs. Entering the fantasy playoffs, you need to be able to hold on to the guys that you could just slip right into your lineup and play right away if you were to be dealing with any injuries. But bringing up a guy like Rico Dowdle once again for I believe the 3rd straight week, I think needs to be done. He does have a touchdown in 2 of the last 3 weeks. And even though Dallas was out in front and winning easily against Washington, he didn't get a ton of work. Tony Pollard looked a lot better last week as well. So Dowdle for me, if you're really trying to scrape by this week, is like a low floor, low ceiling, touchdown dependent, risky play. But if they can get out in front of Seattle and Dallas can keep playing the way that they have been, maybe we'll see a little bit of Dowdle this week. With Devon Achane out this week after tweaking his knee a couple of weeks ago, Jeff Wilson stood in as the backup. Now, he was a healthy scratch a couple of weeks ago, and then he comes back this past week and gets 11 carries on the ground. Now, is he going to be taking RB1 status away from Raheem Mostert? Absolutely not. But he's definitely the backup to own as of right now until we know whether or not Achane will be able to play this week. And if for some reason Achane misses again, Wilson actually becomes a pretty decent flex option. I need to bring up D'Ernest Johnson because we actually got a couple of comments about him last week. And I told everybody at that time, I don't know if D'Ernest Johnson is really the number 2, because if something were to happen to ETN, I still feel like Tank Bigsby would see a majority of the touches on the ground, and D'Ernest Johnson would be the pass catching back, 3rd down back, that type of a player. But this past week, D'Ernest Johnson was clearly the number 2 on the roster. So I am going to change it a little bit here. If you own Travis Etienne, D'Ernest Johnson is the handcuff you will want to own. I brought up Samaje Perine last week because it looked like he was taking back over as the RB2 in this offense, and he ends up getting the goal line touchdown this week against Cleveland. He does appear to have unseated Jaleel McLaughlin as that secondary running back to Javonte Williams, and once again may be a flex option for those of you in deeper leagues. Royce Freeman is the clear number 2 behind Kyren Williams right now, and it was brought up by Sean McVay that they might ease Kyren Williams back into that lead back role, but he didn't need any easing this past week. The dude was absolutely fantastic once again. But if you own Kyren Williams, you should definitely own Royce Freeman as his backup, and if they go ahead and ease him again this week just a little bit, or if the Rams are leading, then we could see a little bit of Royce Freeman going over probably 10 touches total. Now, Minnesota is going into the bye next week, and they are on Monday Night Football, which happens after this video is recorded. But I really got to bring up Ty Chandler once again, because if for some reason Alexander Mattison squanders another opportunity and just cannot get the job done on Monday Night Football, I think we are going to see a healthy dose of Ty Chandler moving forward. Now, Mattison has some pretty clear issues with fumbling the football, and especially in some situations this year where you need to be holding on to the football. So Ty Chandler is really sneaking up behind him right now, and even though Mattison has had these issues all season long and still hasn't lost his job here in week 12, going into week 13 and into week 14 out of their bye, Ty Chandler could end up taking over. Not a whole lot of running backs that you can pick up and start right away, but there are going to be some wide receivers that you could start right away. And we're going to kick it off with Jordan Reed once again. He is the clear-cut, most consistent wide receiver on this team right now. Christian Watson's up and down. We're seeing some up and down performances from Romeo Doubs. Jaden Reed is a guy that's getting worked into the game plan outside, in the slot, in the backfield. Anything that they can do to get the football in this guy's hands, Green Bay is trying to do it, and Jordan Love is playing excellent football right now. Brandon Cooks has a touchdown in 4 of his last 6 games, and he's going to have a super low floor every single week, but his ceiling also could be extremely high with the touchdown potential and big play potential. For those of you that wanted Brandon Cooks to do something for your fantasy team to start the year, you were a little disappointed, but maybe down the stretch into the playoffs, he's exactly what you need, is a boost. Last week, Curtis Samuel caught 9 of his 12 targets for 100 yards, and during the Bye-Mageddon, he might be exactly what we need. Now, he's been way too inconsistent this year for us to probably rely on him moving past this, but if you're desperate for somebody and you're looking for a person that could help your team out this week, Curtis Samuel could be that guy. Since the Seahawks were on a bye in week 5, Jackson Smith-Njigba has had at least 40 yards in every game but one since then. And with Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf getting plenty of looks as well, Jackson Smith-Njigba doesn't have that great of a ceiling, but we've seen some big play potential, and I really think he's starting to earn the trust of Geno Smith as well. Coming out of the draft, he was my wide receiver 1, and I haven't seen anything that changes my mind, and I believe Geno Smith is starting to rely on him a little bit more and feel a little bit more comfortable with him, especially with some of these crazy one-handed catches he's making. He's a safe, reliable target, and even though his ceiling is not great, we could hopefully lock him in for anywhere from 4 to 6 fantasy points a week if you have a wide receiver 3 spot you're trying to fill on your team. I don't know if I'm really looking to start Jonathan Mingo, but he's got a really nice matchup against Tampa Bay upcoming this week, and with Hayden Hurst and Terrace Marshall Jr. out last week, he led the team and seemed to be the #1 target. Definitely could be a guy this week that offers you a little bit of a nice floor. If we can get him right around 60 receiving yards and maybe 4 receptions, 10 fantasy points is absolutely something that I would be willing to take during the Bye-Mageddon. I brought up Tutu Atwell last week, and I'm going to bring him up again this week because Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp just do not look 100% healthy. And maybe they'll get more healthy heading into this week. But if they don't, Atwell's going to be a guy that's going to be the big playmaker on this team. And going up against Cleveland, it's going to be a tough matchup. And you can bet your bottom dollar that Nacua and Kupp will bring the biggest amount of eyes on them on every offensive snap. So it is possible that Tutu Atwell this week might be able to get himself free for 1 or 2 big plays that don't bring a really nice floor or consistent floor, but with a big play could bring you a decent ceiling. Bringing up Greg Dortch again, 9 targets with no Michael Wilson again this week, and his numbers were not as good as they were a couple of weeks ago, but he did score a touchdown. The issue for Greg Dortch is if you're trying to pick him up as soon as Michael Wilson comes back, I doubt Greg Dortch has any fantasy value whatsoever, but keep an eye on it this week. If Michael Wilson ends up missing again, Greg Dortch could be a guy that we look to for a little stability in the flex position. Cedric Tillman and Elijah Moore will be 2 interesting names to keep an eye on this week. Amari Cooper is banged up, DTR had to leave the game last week and PJ Walker came in, and Joe Flacco is in Cleveland now and getting up to par with the playbook. Who's going to play quarterback? Is Amari Cooper going to be healthy this week? Elijah Moore's 9 targets last week led the team, but Cedric Tillman led wide receivers in receiving yards. Both of these guys could be interesting pickups this week. Listen, I know Demario Douglas is not setting the world on fire, and he's not winning you weeks, but he's not losing you weeks either, and the opportunity is better than a lot of other guys that you could pick off the waivers right now. The dude is less than 50% owned across multiple platforms. Over his last 2 games, he has 9 targets in both of those games. Over his last 4 games, he has at least 7 targets in each of those games. Yeah, We may not know what in the world is going to be going on at the quarterback position this week for New England, but we sure as heck know that Demario Douglas is getting all the targets no matter what. We should be stashing this guy for weeks exactly like this. Guys like Jaden Reed and Demario Douglas are the guys that I absolutely have to have off the waiver wire first this week. But a name like Josh Palmer is right there behind those guys. He could potentially come off the IR this week, and as of this recording, it has not been announced yet whether or not he can make his return. But now that Quentin Johnston is banged up, along with almost everybody else in Los Angeles, it feels like Palmer's going to slip right back into that wide receiver 2 role and have some big playmaking ability down the stretch. If he somehow found his way to waivers in your league, grab him now and let's stash him for the rest of the season. Jalen Hyatt is going into the bye, so he might not be a priority ad for us this week, but he caught 5 of his 6 targets for 109 yards, as DeVito looks to be the best quarterback in MetLife Stadium right now, which is crazy to even think or discuss. But he has shown a willingness to push the ball down the field over the last couple of weeks. 2 weeks ago, though, it was Darius Slayton. This week it is Jalen Hyatt. Who could it be when they come out of the bye? There's really no telling. So maybe Hyatt isn't a priority ad this week, but depending on future weeks, we might as well grab him early if you have the roster space to do so. All right, let's go ahead and jump on over into some tight ends, and Juwan Johnson is going to lead the way for me. Michael Thomas was already out coming into this game. Rashid Shaheed had to leave the field early. Chris Olave had to come off the field at one point. They are banged up with their playmakers, and going up against the Detroit Lions this week, whose secondary has looked tired but does have a few extra days of rest to help them out, could end up being a big day for Juwan Johnson if we end up missing anybody else in that wide receiver core. I talked about Tanner Hudson quite a bit last week, and he had 5 targets and over 40 receiving yards. So really, by the tight end standards, it wasn't that bad of a week. The biggest issue is it wasn't him that got the touchdown. It went to Drew Sample. Now, Sample and Irv Smith only saw 2 targets each. So Tanner Hudson clearly is still the #1 tight end right now. Keep an eye on him down the stretch. Not a whole lot of ceiling, but maybe some bigger games ahead for us. If you've been watching our waiver wire shows and you've been dealing with issues at the tight end position, then hopefully you picked up Pat Freiermuth, because I've been reminding everybody coming off the IR, he is definitely a guy that can make an impact down the stretch for us. Now, was I willing to run him out there and try to start him right away? No, not really. Only 1 target a week ago, but absolutely blowing the doors off of it this week with no Matt Canada running the plays anymore. Kenny Pickett looked a lot better. Pat Freiermuth looked amazing. The offense as a whole for Pittsburgh looked a lot more dynamic than it has in quite some time. Now, what are we going to get moving forward from Pat Freiermuth? Maybe not the same type of numbers we saw this past week, but in the past, we have seen Kenny Pickett rely on Pat Freiermuth, especially when they get into the red zone. He absolutely could be a guy that finishes as a top 5 tight end over the next several weeks as we close out the season. I don't really have a whole lot to say about Tyler Higbee, but I knew people were going to ask about him coming off of 2 touchdowns, and honestly, I'm not interested in it. I would rather take a shot on some other guys who have shown some consistent workloads over the full season. At this point, Tyler Higbee, even with injuries to Nakua and Kupp at times this season, he hasn't done anything for a majority of the year. And he always tears up Arizona anyway, like he did again this past week. So Tyler Higbee, if you play in a deeper league, maybe you take a shot. But anything 12 teams or less, I'm still out on him. Gerald Everett looked a lot healthier this past week, caught all 4 targets for 43 yards and a touchdown. And the big question this week is going to be whether or not Quentin Johnston is healthy enough to play and whether or not Josh Palmer returns from IR. If neither of those things happen, then Gerald Everett could definitely be a really nice solid volume play with touchdown upside in week 13. Luke Musgrave is going to be missing the next few weeks with a kidney laceration, but Tucker Kraft stepped in this past week and ran a route on 88% of Green Bay snaps. Now, is he going to get a ton of volume? No, and he didn't this past week, but he scored a touchdown. Green Bay's moving the ball and moving it well. Jordan Love looks really good right now, and if they find themselves in the red zone quite often, Tucker Kraft will probably see some of those targets. All right, we need to talk about some streaming options because with 6 teams on a bye this week, it is essential that we know some guys that we could potentially plug and play, especially if you haven't been holding any type of backup quarterbacks or only playing a 1 QB league. And obviously, if you've been rolling with one defense the entire year, you may need a different one this week. But from the quarterback position, we have a couple of decent options for you. Number 1 is going to be Jordan Love because believe it or not, he is still under 60% owned on almost every single platform. Even with the way he's played over the last couple of weeks, people really have not been running to grab him. Or if they have, they used him as a streaming option and dropped him right back to waivers. So if he's still out there for you this week, not only could he be a decent streaming option, but if you're struggling at the tight end position, he could be a good option the rest of the way. Kenny Pickett threw for over 250 yards for the first time in over a year. That's right, week 11 of 2022 was the last time that he hit that mark. And this offense looked a lot better as a whole with no Matt Canada. And now going up against Arizona that allows the 9th most passing yards in the league, maybe Kenny Pickett doesn't have a huge ceiling, but if he can limit any type of turnovers and throw for around 250 yards again, let's hope he can throw a passing touchdown, and then it will be a great streaming option for the week. What about Russell Wilson? The Houston defense has looked really good this year, and as I told my buddy Rico this past week, hey, yeah, your Texans didn't get that win against Jacksonville, but it's a shock to a lot of people that you're even here, and it's a big testament to the turnaround that they have had, and I'm rooting for Houston the rest of the way. But they still have some holes. They're allowing the 6th most passing yards right now on the season, and Russell Wilson, even though he doesn't have a high ceiling, his floor is pretty high. Only 4 interceptions this season and has thrown at least 1 passing touchdown in every game. Denver's playing really, really good right now, and after a horrendous start to the season, they have turned it around and they are back into the playoff hunt. Russell Wilson is playing very well and could help out your fantasy team quite a bit this week. All right, we need to talk about the defensive side of the ball. And if you're looking for a streaming option this week, there are 3 teams that I'm really liking. And it's crazy to mention the New York Jets, but just a few weeks ago, they were over 80% owned on multiple platforms. And now this week, they're right around 60% owned on all those same platforms. Now, really the reason for that could be 2 things. Maybe fantasy owners were dealing with buys and they were carrying 2 defenses. And because of that, they decided to drop the New York Jets, and they just haven't needed to pick another one up since then. It could also be that the Jets have had some tougher offensive matchups, whether it be like Kansas City or Philadelphia several weeks ago, or maybe it's because they played Miami and Buffalo recently. Maybe there was just some higher upside defenses that teams thought about running with. But for now, the New York Jets, if they're sitting out there on your waiver wire for some reason, they're inside the top 10 of most defensive points on the fantasy side of things, and now they're getting the Atlanta Falcons, who they could easily cause quite a bit of turnovers for. This would be the perfect week if they've been sitting out there for you. Indianapolis's defense can give up a few yards on the ground and through the air, but they have caused at least 4 sacks and 2 turnovers in each of the last 3 games. And those are the type of things that cause fantasy points to go up, even if you're giving up the yards. But going up against Tennessee this week, there could be a good opportunity to shut down Will Levis, or maybe make him make a few mistakes, even if Derrick Henry still has a decent game against you. And Tampa Bay's defense really hasn't been utilized this year because even though they're really good at stopping the run, even though Jonathan Taylor got him this past week, they've been terrible against passing offenses. But Bryce Young in Carolina, their offense is just in an absolute disaster state of affairs right now. And because of that, lots of turnovers, sacks, and other opportunities could be there for Tampa Bay's defense to have a really good game that you could stream this week. All right, now you might be asking about players that you could drop, but once again, with 6 teams on a bye, it's hard to drop anybody, especially with there being a lot of injuries that we're dealing with right now. So for me, I'm not going to blanket call dropping anybody, but if you've got questions about somebody that you would like to drop, let me know down in the comments. Keep it short, keep it sweet, keep it simple. Just put drop, whoever, add, whoever, and I'll let you know yes or no, and we'll just roll from there, baby. Hopefully this episode was able to help you out and get you in an area that you feel good about, even if you're missing some players this week. Good luck putting in your waiver claims or using your fab or however you pick up free agents in your league. Hopefully you get some of these guys if you're going to need to utilize them in week 13. But for now, I've got to go do some running back research. So peace out, Headliner Nation. Stay safe and stay healthy, and I'll catch you all on the next episode of the Fantasy Headliners.